Tyson Fury's towering frame loomed over the cozy diner, his every move a mixture of elegance and awkwardness. The mismatched chairs and checkered tablecloths of the small-town eatery seemed almost ridiculous against his enormous presence. The locals loved him, their former boxing hero now serving their morning coffee, but not everyone shared their sentiment. Randall Carter, the diner's cranky owner, held no such affection for Tyson. To Randall, Fury was an unwelcome disruption. His past fame overshadowed the diner's humble charm, drawing crowds that complicated Randall's strictly enforced routines. Beneath his gruff exterior, resentment brewed like cheap diner coffee. The underlying racism Randall rarely voiced, but frequently acted on, became a source of subtle yet constant tension. From Tyson's first day, Randall nitpicked. "Keep the coffee pots full, not half empty like your career," he sneered one morning, a jibe that didn't go unnoticed by the staff. Tyson, unbothered, laughed it off, using his wit as a shield. But the cutting remarks escalated, gaining an edge that others in the diner began to feel uneasy about. One quiet evening, an incident turned heads. A family walked in, black, dressed modestly, and smiling as they took a booth near the window. Tyson greeted them warmly and took their order. Randall's mood soured. He stormed to the kitchen, barking at the staff. "Make sure they pay before they eat. You know how these types can be," he muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Tyson froze, the jovial atmosphere around him instantly evaporating. "Excuse me?" Tyson said, his voice calm but firm, standing in the narrow passage between the counter and tables. Randall looked up, feigning innocence. "Didn't mean anything by it," he shrugged, but his smirk betrayed his meaning. "Yeah, you did," Tyson replied, his voice dropping, the weight of his words settling over the diner like a heavy cloud. The customers, now silent, exchanged glances. Tyson turned to the family, reassuring them with a smile. "You'll be served right, don't worry about anything." But the tension was far from over. The local gossip mill churned to life. Whispers spread about Randall's behavior, each story worse than the last. Some patrons began boycotting the diner, choosing other establishments over the discomfort of Randall's overt prejudice. Meanwhile, Tyson became a quiet force of change, defying Randall in ways that didn't require words. He worked harder, served every table with kindness, and made a point to treat every customer equally, no matter their background. Locals rallied around him, leaving larger tips and offering their support in subtle but impactful ways. Fury's character shone like a beacon in stark contrast to Randall's pettiness. Randall's animosity boiled over one busy Friday night. A table of rowdy teenagers, mostly white, from the local high school, left without paying their bill. Randall didn't confront them. Instead, he stormed into the kitchen and confronted Tyson, accusing him of negligence. "Maybe you're too used to being pampered, Fury," Randall spat, his voice laced with venom. "Or is this just how you people operate?" The silence that followed was deafening. Tyson's expression turned cold, his large hands gripping the edge of the counter to steady himself. "Say that again," he said, his voice low, yet somehow more threatening than a shout. Randall hesitated, but doubled down. "You heard me." The diner staff and remaining customers watched, holding their breath. One of the regulars, an elderly woman named Doris, finally stood up. "You've gone too far, Randall," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "Tyson's done more for this town in months than you have in years. Shame on you." Others chimed in, their voices growing louder. "We're sick of your attitude," shouted a man from the corner booth. Another patron demanded an apology for Tyson. The uproar forced Randall to retreat to his office, slamming the door behind him. In the aftermath, Tyson took a deep breath and turned to the staff. "I'll finish the shift," he said simply, his calm demeanor restoring order to the room. The next morning, Randall returned to the diner, finding a petition on the counter demanding his resignation. Over 200 signatures were already scrawled across the pages, and the list grew as the hours passed. Tyson, as always, kept his head high, serving coffee and stacking plates as if nothing had happened. Eventually, the pressure mounted. Randall sold the diner, leaving town in disgrace. The new owner, a progressive-minded entrepreneur, rebranded the establishment but kept Tyson on board, making him the unofficial face of the business. The diner thrived under new management, with locals and visitors alike flocking to meet their unexpected hero. Tyson's resilience turned a toxic environment into a beacon of community and acceptance. It wasn't just his physical strength that made him a champion. It was his heart, determination, and refusal to let hate win. One chilly morning, as the frost clung stubbornly to the diner's windows, I noticed a man huddled in the corner booth. He wasn't eating, just sitting there, his gaze fixed on the table as if trying to disappear into it. I knew the look. Hard times had etched their story into his tattered clothes, his unshaven face, and the weight in his eyes. It wasn't the first time someone down on their luck had found refuge in the warmth of the diner. I stepped over, coffee pot in hand. "You all right, mate?" I asked, leaning slightly over the table to meet his gaze. He glanced up, startled. His voice was low, almost embarrassed. I'm just trying to stay warm. I don't have money for food." There was no hesitation in my response. "Don't worry about that. Let me sort you out." I could hear the murmurs from other tables, the rustle of newspapers lowering as the regulars watched. It wasn't like they were bad people, but curiosity always got the better of them when something out of the ordinary happened. I ignored it, heading to the kitchen. Moments later, I came back with a plate of pancakes, steaming and golden, with a generous knob of butter melting down the sides. I placed it in front of him alongside a fresh cup of coffee. "Eat up, lad," I said, giving him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. He looked at the plate like it was the first hot meal he'd seen in years. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice trembling. Tears welled in his eyes as he picked up the fork. "Don't mention it," I said, moving on to refill coffee cups around the room. I didn't need the thanks. Seeing the relief in his face was enough. From that moment on, Micah Jordan became a fixture at the diner. At first, he'd only show up early in the morning or late at night when he thought he wouldn't be noticed. He'd slip into the same corner booth, quiet and unassuming. I made sure he always got something warm to eat, a small gesture that felt like the least I could do. It wasn't long before the rest of the staff started pitching in. Ruby, our sassy, sharp-tongued waitress who'd been working here longer than I'd been alive, started sneaking him extra coffee refills. "Man's got a tough road," she said when I asked her about it. "Least we can do is make it a little less rough." Micah opened up bit by bit. He'd been a factory worker in the next town over, but the plant had closed 2 years ago. His wife left soon after, taking their 2 kids with her. He ended up on the streets, bouncing between shelters when he could find room. He told me all of this one quiet afternoon when the diner was nearly empty, his words slow and careful, like he was afraid they might break if he said them too loud. I listened, leaning against the counter with my arms crossed, nodding at the right moments. "Tough break," I said when he finished. "But you're still standing, yeah? That counts for something." He smiled faintly at that. "Not sure how much longer I can keep it up." "You'll figure it out," I said firmly. "Everyone's got a fight in them. You just gotta find yours." It was the same advice I gave myself when life had knocked me on my backside. Boxing had taught me that no matter how many times you got knocked down, the fight wasn't over until you chose not to get back up. Over the weeks, Micah started to change. He still looked rough around the edges, but there was a spark of life in him that hadn't been there before. He started helping out around the diner, sweeping floors and taking out the trash without being asked. Randall might have thrown a fit over it if he were still in charge, but under the new management, no one batted an eye. If anything, people started pitching in more to help Micah. The regulars began to warm up to him too. Old Joe, who came in every morning for black coffee and toast, started bringing Micah extra clothes. "Found this old jacket in the attic," Joe said one day, dropping a well-worn but sturdy coat on the booth beside Micah. "Figured you might need it more than the moths." Micah looked at the jacket like it was made of gold. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't know what to say." Joe just grunted and waved him off, but I caught the hint of a smile tugging at his lips as he shuffled back to his seat. One evening, after the dinner rush had settled, Micah approached me as I was wiping down the counter. He looked nervous, fidgeting with the sleeves of his new jacket. "Tyson," he began, his voice hesitant. "I've been thinking about getting back on my feet." Maybe finding work. That's good, mate, I said, setting the cloth aside. You've got any leads? He shook his head. Not yet, but I was wondering, would you mind being a reference for me? I grinned. Course I will. Just make sure you don't slack off, yeah? Don't want my name attached to a lazy bum. Micah laughed at that, the sound raw but genuine. It was the first time I'd heard him laugh, and it struck me how far he'd come since that cold morning when he first walked into the diner. As the days passed, Micah started taking steps toward rebuilding his life. He landed a part-time job at a warehouse, and though the hours were long and the pay was low, he carried himself differently now, with purpose. Watching him reminded me that sometimes, all someone needs is a little kindness to find their footing again. The diner continued to hum with life, its tables full of stories like Micah's, stories of struggle, resilience, and, most importantly, hope. And every so often, when I poured a cup of coffee or served a plate of pancakes, I'd catch Micah's eye across the room and see the quiet gratitude in his smile. That's what kept me going. Not the applause or the headlines I'd left behind, but the simple, powerful connection of helping someone find their fight. Randall Carter stormed out from behind the counter, his face red as a tomato and his eyes blazing with anger. Tyson, what the hell do you think you're doing? His voice cut through the soft chatter of the diner like a knife. I turned to face him, standing my ground. He's hungry, boss. Just giving him a meal, I said, my voice calm but firm. I didn't see the harm in it. Micah was just a man down on his luck, needing a little kindness. But Randall saw it differently. Randall's hand shot out, finger trembling as he pointed at Micah, who was shrinking into the corner booth like he wanted to disappear. This is my diner, Randall spat, and I don't give handouts, especially not to the likes of him. The whole diner froze. You could have heard a pin drop. Every set of eyes turned to us. My jaw tightened, but I didn't rise to his anger. Instead, I met his glare with steady composure. You've got a right to run your diner, Randall, I said, my voice low and measured. But I've got a right to do what's right. If that's a problem, maybe I'm not your man. For a second, I thought he might back down, but Randall sneered, his lips curling like he'd just bitten into something sour. You're not, he snapped. You're fired. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I nodded slowly, not surprised. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me as I untied my apron and set it down on the counter. I wasn't about to beg for my job, especially not after what he just said. I turned to Micah, who was frozen in place, looking like he might get up and leave. Don't worry, mate, I told him, giving him a reassuring smile. You finish your meal. It's on me. Then, without another word, I walked out. The bell above the door jingled as it closed behind me, the cold morning air hitting my face. I took a deep breath, trying to let it cool the heat rising in my chest. I wasn't angry about losing the job. It wasn't about the money for me. What got under my skin was Randall. The way he'd pointed at Micah like he was less than human. The way he made the diner feel cold and unwelcoming. That wasn't how I wanted to live my life, no matter how simple or humble I wanted things to be. Outside, the sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, casting long shadows on the pavement. I didn't have a plan, but I didn't need one. I'd figure something out. For now, I just kept walking, letting the crisp air clear my head. By the time I got home, I'd already made up my mind. If Randall didn't want me at the diner, fine. But that didn't mean I couldn't still help people. There were other ways to make a difference, other ways to give back. Boxing had taught me a lot of things. Discipline, resilience, and most importantly, how to fight for what matters. I spent the next couple of days making calls, talking to folks in town, figuring out what I could do. Eventually, an idea started to take shape. There was an old community center on the edge of town, a place that used to host everything from kids' birthday parties to senior yoga classes. It had been shut down for years, but the building was still standing. With a little work, it could be a space where people like Micah could come to get a meal, find shelter, or just feel welcome. I used some of my savings to rent the place and got to work cleaning it up. It wasn't much at first, just a few folding tables and chairs, a donated coffee pot, and some secondhand supplies. But word spread quickly. People started dropping off donations, canned goods, blankets, even an old couch. A few of the regulars from the diner stopped by to lend a hand, and soon enough, the place started to feel like something real. Micah showed up on the second day, looking unsure of himself. "Heard you were setting something up here," he said, shuffling his feet. "Yeah," I said, grinning. "Figured I'd try running my own diner, if you will." He laughed, the sound light and easy, like he hadn't laughed in years. "Need any help?" "Always," I said, handing him a broom. He got to work, sweeping up dust and debris without a second thought. Over time, more folks started coming in. Some were like Micah, down on their luck and looking for a hot meal. Others just wanted to help. A local baker started dropping off leftover bread at the end of the day. Ruby, bless her heart, volunteered to cook a couple of nights a week. Even old Joe, the man who rarely spoke more than a grunt at the diner, showed up with a bag of tools to fix the leaky sink. The place became a haven, not just for the people who needed it, but for the whole community. It was a reminder that sometimes, all it takes is a little kindness to change the world around you. As for Randall, the diner didn't last long after I left. Word got around about how he'd treated Micah, and people stopped coming. He eventually sold the place and skipped town, leaving behind a tarnished reputation and a bad taste in everyone's mouth. I don't regret a thing. Losing that job was the best thing that could have happened. It gave me the chance to build something better, something that wasn't just about serving coffee or flipping pancakes, but about making people feel seen, valued, and cared for. Looking back, I realized that was the real fight I'd been training for all along. Not in the ring, but in life. And I'm proud to say I'm still standing. As soon as I stepped onto the sidewalk, the cold air hit me, but before I could even take a proper breath, a sleek black car rolled up to the curb. It stood out against the quiet streets of our small town, like a polished diamond in a pile of rocks. The door opened, and out stepped a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine. Sharp suit, clean cut, and a presence that made you pay attention. He walked right up to me and extended his hand. "Tyson Fury," he said, a confident smile on his face. "I know who you are. Big fan of your work, both in and out of the ring. I saw what just happened in there. That was a class act." I looked at him, surprised, but shook his hand firmly. "Just doing what felt right," I said with a shrug. I wasn't sure how much he'd seen, but I didn't think much of it. His smile widened. "We need people like you at the Horizon Project." I frowned, trying to place the name. "The Horizon Project? What's that?" "It's an organization focused on community outreach," he explained. "We help people get back on their feet, homelessness, addiction recovery, job training, you name it. I'm Oliver Grant, the director. I happened to be passing through town when I saw you stand up to that diner owner." He gestured back toward the building with a slight tilt of his head. "That took guts." "Well, I don't know about all that," I said, crossing my arms. "Seemed like the only thing to do." Oliver chuckled, as if he appreciated my humility. "That's exactly the kind of attitude we need. What do you say, Tyson? How about joining us? We're always looking for compassionate people to help make a difference." I raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this was going. "You're offering me a job?" "Not just a job," he said, his tone serious now. "A purpose. Think about it. With your reputation, your heart, and your ability to connect with people, you could change lives." I took a step back, needing a moment to process. "Look, I appreciate the offer, Mr. Grant, but I just lost a job 2 minutes ago. I don't think I'm looking to jump into anything new right now." Oliver didn't miss a beat. "That's exactly why this is the right time. You're not tied down, and from what I can tell, you're already making a difference on your own. The Horizon Project would just give you the tools and support to take it to the next level." I rubbed the back of my neck, still uncertain. It all sounded good, sure, but it also felt sudden. "I'll think about it," I said, not wanting to dismiss him outright but still needing time to wrap my head around the idea. "Fair enough," Oliver replied, handing me a sleek business card. His name and title were embossed in silver letters, along with a number and email address. "Take your time, but don't take too long. People like you don't come around every day, Tyson." With that, he stepped back into his car and drove off, leaving me standing there in the chill of the morning, staring at the card in my hand. The Horizon Project? It sounded big, important even, But was it really something I wanted to do? I turned the card over, running my thumb across the smooth surface. Part of me wanted to toss it in the nearest trash bin and forget about it. After all, I'd just gotten used to the quiet life. No crowds, no pressure, just me trying to keep my feet on the ground. But another part of me couldn't ignore the pull of his words, a purpose. Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the card still in my hand. Micah's face kept flashing in my mind. How grateful he'd looked when I'd brought him that plate of pancakes, how much lighter he'd seemed after just a little kindness. If one meal could make that kind of difference, what could I do with real resources behind me? Still, doubt gnawed at me. What if I wasn't cut out for something like this? What if I messed it all up? But then I remembered the words that had gotten me through so many fights, both in the ring and out. You don't win by staying on the ropes. The next morning, I picked up my phone and dialed the number on the card. Oliver answered on the second ring, his voice bright and full of energy. Tyson, didn't expect to hear from you so soon. I thought about what you said, I replied. And I reckon you're right. I'm in. The smile in his voice was unmistakable. That's what I like to hear. Welcome aboard, Tyson. You won't regret this. As I hung up the phone, a sense of determination settled over me. I didn't know exactly what I was getting into, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was stepping into something that mattered. It wasn't about the money or the recognition. It was about using what I had, my strength, my experience, my heart, to make a real difference. And for the first time, I felt like I'd found a new fight worth winning. The next day, I walked into the Horizon Project's community kitchen, ready for my first task. The place was a hive of activity, volunteers chopping vegetables, stirring pots, and stacking trays of food. The smell of fresh bread and hearty stew filled the air, and the hum of conversations mixed with the clatter of utensils. It was chaos, but it felt right. I rolled up my sleeves and got stuck in, chopping onions and peeling potatoes with the kind of focus I used to save for the boxing ring. The work was simple, but the purpose behind it was anything but. Every meal we prepared wasn't just food. It was hope for someone who needed it. The first time I served a plate, I was nervous. Isn't that mad? A bloke who used to fight in front of thousands of people, suddenly worrying about handing someone a bowl of soup. But then I saw their face light up when I asked how their day was going, and all that nervousness disappeared. I realized it wasn't about me, it was about them. Day after day, I showed up, and the faces became familiar. I learned their names, their stories, their struggles. Some came in looking broken, others just tired, but every single one of them left with something more than just a meal. That's what kept me going. Then, one evening, as I was ladling stew into bowls, I saw him, Micah. He walked through the kitchen doors, looking like a different man. His clothes were cleaner, his beard was trimmed, and there was a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself. He still had that shy look about him, but there was a spark in his eye I hadn't seen before. Micah, I called, my voice booming across the room. Heads turned, but I didn't care. Seeing him walk in like that felt like a victory. He looked up, and when he spotted me, his face broke into a grin. Mr. Fury, Tyson, he said, stumbling over his words in his excitement. I didn't think I'd see you again. I laughed, setting the ladle down and stepping out from behind the counter. I clapped a hand on his shoulder, the way I always did. What are you up to, mate? Micah looked down, almost bashful, but then he started talking. He told me he'd been getting help from the Horizon Project, housing support, job training, the works. They've done so much for me, he said, his voice full of gratitude. And it all started with you, Tyson. That day in the diner. It gave me hope. I didn't know what to say to that. I just nodded, feeling a lump in my throat I wasn't expecting. And now, Micah continued, his voice growing stronger, I want to give back. That's why I'm here. I want to help. Good on you, I said, my chest swelling with pride. Come on then. Let's get you started. I introduced him to the team, showing him how we ran things. He jumped right in, rolling up his sleeves and getting to work like he'd been doing it for years. Watching him serve others, seeing the way he spoke to them with kindness and understanding, I realized just how far he'd come. Over the next few weeks, Micah became a regular at the kitchen. He wasn't just volunteering. He was thriving. The other volunteers took to him right away, and the people we served respected him because they knew he understood what they were going through. He didn't just hand out meals. He connected with people, listening to their stories and sharing his own. One night, as we were cleaning up, Micah came over and leaned against the counter beside me. "Tyson," he said, his voice thoughtful, "do you ever think about how one small thing can change everything?" "All the time, mate," I replied. "It's like boxing. One punch can turn a fight around. One choice can change your life." He nodded, looking down at the mop in his hands. "That's what you did for me, you know? That one meal. It turned everything around. I don't know where I'd be if you hadn't done that." I shook my head, not wanting to take credit. "You did the hard part, Micah. You got back up. I just gave you a nudge." He smiled at that, a genuine, heartfelt smile that said more than words ever could. As the months went on, the community kitchen became more than just a place to serve food. It was a place of transformation, not just for the people who walked through the doors, but for all of us who worked there. I saw lives change before my eyes, people finding jobs, getting sober, reuniting with their families. It was humbling, knowing I got to be a small part of that. Micah, though, he was special. He became a leader in the kitchen, taking on more responsibility and inspiring others to do the same. He even started running workshops, teaching basic cooking skills to people who were trying to stand on their own 2 feet. Watching him step into that role, I felt like I was witnessing something extraordinary. And through it all, I kept thinking about Oliver Grant's words when he'd first approached me. Not just a job, a purpose. At the time, I wasn't sure what he meant, but now I understood. It wasn't about the work itself. It was about what the work represented. It was about finding meaning in helping others, about fighting for something bigger than yourself. I thought I'd left my fighting days behind when I walked away from the ring. But standing there in that kitchen, watching Micah and the others find hope again, I realized I'd found a new kind of fight. And this one was worth every second. As the weeks went by, I found myself more deeply rooted in the Horizon Project. What started as a new job quickly became a mission, a calling even. I used my name and whatever bit of fame I still had to bring attention to what we were doing. It felt strange at first, seeing my face on posters and hearing my name in interviews again. But this time, it wasn't about me. It was about the people we were helping, the ones who needed a second chance, a warm meal, or even just a kind word. Micah, too, was thriving. He started as a volunteer, sweeping floors and serving plates, but it didn't take long for everyone to see he was made for more. The man had a heart the size of the town, and it showed in everything he did. By the end of the second month, he'd become a full-time staff member, running programs, managing volunteers, and connecting with people in ways I never could. Watching him grow into his role was like watching someone step into the light after years in the dark. While things were looking up for us, the same couldn't be said for Randall Carter. Word of what happened in the diner that day spread like wildfire. Stories of his behavior, his words, his attitude. It all came back to haunt him. People stopped coming. The diner, once a bustling hub for regulars and travelers alike, became a ghost town. One evening, out of the blue, Randall showed up at the community center. I was sweeping up after dinner service when I saw him standing awkwardly near the door, his hands stuffed into his coat pockets. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Tyson," he said, his voice quiet, almost sheepish. I leaned the broom against the wall and walked over to him. "Randall," I replied, nodding. "Didn't expect to see you here." He sighed, looking down at the floor. "I've made a mess of things," he admitted. "The diner's going under and I don't know what to do." I studied him for a moment. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. "Why are you here, Randall?" He hesitated before answering. "I need advice. You're good with people. You've turned this place into something special. I thought maybe you could help me figure out how to fix things." I crossed my arms, considering his words. Part of me wanted to tell him to shove off, to remind him of all the times he'd let his pride and prejudice get the better of him. But then I thought about what we were trying to build here. A place where people could start over, no matter who they were or what they'd done. "You've got a good heart, Randall," I said, surprising even myself. "You just need to show it. Donate the diner to the Horizon Project. Let it become a place that serves everyone. His head shot up, his eyes wide. Donate it? He repeated, like the word physically hurt him. Yeah, I said, holding his gaze. You're struggling to keep it afloat anyway. Let it be something bigger than just a diner. Let it be a place that gives back. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he let out a long breath, nodding slowly. All right, he said, his voice heavy. If you think it'll do some good, I'll do it. And just like that, the diner got a second life. We transformed it into a community center, a place where people could come for a hot meal, job training, or just a bit of company. The old regulars started coming back, not just to eat but to volunteer. Even Randall pitched in, though it took him some time to adjust to the new way of doing things. Months later, the Horizon Project hosted an event to celebrate its success. The community center was packed that night. Families, volunteers, donors, and people whose lives had been changed by the work we were doing. Oliver Grant had insisted I say a few words, so there I was, standing behind a podium, feeling more nervous than I ever had in the ring. When I retired from boxing, I began, my voice steady but slow. I didn't know what to do with myself. I thought my days of making a difference were behind me. But I've learned something since then, something I wish I'd known sooner. Real strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much good you can do. The room was quiet, everyone hanging on my words. I glanced down at Micah, sitting in the front row, and smiled. One act of kindness can change everything. Sometimes, the people we help end up teaching us more than we teach them. Micah nodded, his eyes glistening, and for a moment, I had to look away to keep my own emotions in check. The audience erupted in applause, but I raised my hands to quiet them. This isn't just my story, I said. It's all of ours. Together, we can make the world a better place, one plate of pancakes at a time. When the event ended, Micah and I stood outside, watching people filter out, their faces bright with hope. The air was cool, but it felt good, refreshing even. Micah turned to me, grinning. You know, Tyson, I think you might still be the champ. I laughed, shaking my head. Not in the ring anymore, mate. But yeah, I reckon I'm still fighting the good fight. And you're winning, he said, his grin widening. You're winning. Looking out at the community we'd built together, I couldn't help but agree.